Big Shaq's wife poured lemonade with grace, while millionaires whispered behind crystal glasses. The same millionaires who didn't know the backyard didn't belong to them. They laughed at the wrong woman, unaware the real billionaire in the room wasn't wearing a suit. When legacy speaks, even pearls lose their shine. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The sun threw down golden ribbons across the manicured lawn of a sprawling estate, nestled in an elite pocket of George's wealth belt. The kind of neighborhood where wealth didn't whisper. It curated, coated in ivy, hedged with imported roses, and gate-locked tighter than a vault. Birds chirped like they were paid to perform. Caterers moved like ghosts across cobblestone paths. Crystal platters gleamed beneath the morning sun, and laughter, a little too sharp, echoed around white linen tables. In the middle of it all stood Delilah, skin glowing under a floppy straw hat, pouring lemonade into tall glasses for guests who barely acknowledged her. She smiled anyway, a quiet grace radiating from her as if this was second nature. It was her idea, after all. A backyard brunch to raise funds for underfunded school arts programs. Simple, noble. But as the snobs trickled in from their luxury vehicles, it was clear they hadn't come for charity. They came to peacock. Shaquille O'Neal, towering and grounded, leaned against a wood beam by the outdoor kitchen, observing. He wasn't decked out like the others, just jeans and a soft navy button-down, sleeves rolled, gold watch catching stray light. His eyes followed Delilah, his wife of 10 years, as she made her way from table to table, thanking people, correcting seating arrangements, handing out napkins when the wind tried to show off. He saw the way some of them looked at her. How their eyes flicked, how their smiles tightened, the way their laughter changed. When she passed, it wasn't loud, not yet, just that cruel, polished kind of prejudice that only the rich know how to wear like perfume. He didn't move, not yet. Near the center table, Chadwick and Eloise St. Clair arrived with their signature air of inconvenience. They were old money plantation relics in Gucci frames and yacht tans, and their eyes scanned the scene like TSA scanners. Eloise's lips pulled into something shaped like a smile but colder than glass. Chadwick adjusted his cufflinks like he wanted people to notice. "Cute setup," Eloise said, her gaze resting on Delilah like she was analyzing an unfamiliar appetizer. "I wasn't aware the help mingled these days." Delilah tilted her head, smile still intact. "Well, I suppose I never got that memo." "Oh." Eloise chuckled, brushing a strand of platinum hair behind her ear. "You're Shaquille's assistant?" Delilah didn't flinch. "No, ma'am. I'm his wife." Eloise blinked once, twice. "Oh, how charming." Shaq caught the entire exchange. His jaw didn't tighten, his hands didn't clench, he didn't say a word. That was the thing about Big Shaq. People expected thunder, but his silence could split stone. The conversations continued, but now the undertones were louder. Phrases like "how quaint" and "bless her heart" passed between crystal sips and plated arugula salads. Delilah kept hosting, pouring drinks, checking the catered spread, laughing with a grace born of someone who had learned long ago how to smile through being underestimated. Eloise watched her like a crow watches a hummingbird, jealous, curious, but certain it could never be her. "She's got good hips, I'll give her that," she muttered to a woman in a champagne satin dress. "Probably from working on her feet. My girl Kelsey says she used to be a waitress downtown." Imagine that. The other woman laughed too loud, eyes darting to make sure Delilah was out of earshot. A waitress turned basketball wife. That's one for the Netflix specials. Chadwick, swirling his drink nearby, chimed in with a smirk. "There's always one climbing their way in. Marrying up is the new American dream. Right?" Shaq moved to refill his own glass of lemonade. Calm, casual. His fingers brushed Delilah's shoulder as he passed. She looked up and read his expression like a language only they knew. Not yet. His eyes said, "Let them talk." But her eyes, tired and slightly dimmer than they'd been an hour ago, replied, "They always do." Across the patio, a local news photographer clicked away, catching images of the brunch crowd. One of the shots framed Delilah, adjusting a tablecloth while two women in pastel dresses looked on with disdain. It was supposed to be a human interest piece, charity and grace, in the lap of luxury. But the photographer caught something else entirely, truth dressed in white, and judgment wrapped in pearls. Inside the kitchen, the head caterer, an older black woman named Miss Geneva, whispered to Delilah while plating deviled eggs, "I swear if that hawk-nosed witch calls you darlin', One more time, I'm dropping a tray just for the drama. Delilah chuckled quietly. They don't think I belong here. Honey, they don't think anyone belongs here except their reflection. Geneva handed her a fresh plate. But here's the thing. When you build something with your own hands, you don't need their permission to stand in the yard. Delilah looked out the window at the crowd. It's not just about me, it's about what they see when they look at people like us. No matter how nice the house is, we're still the ones expected to serve. Geneva raised a brow, then serve them this. She handed her a chilled mimosa, and winked. With extra pull. Outside, a gust of wind knocked over a floral centerpiece. A few guests gasped, stepping back as petals scattered. Delilah instinctively moved to fix it, kneeling as she arranged the flowers back in place. Eloise, watching from the steps, leaned toward her husband and said, "You see that? Just like I said, she knows her place." But that's when something shifted. Shaq walked over, not rushed, not loud, and knelt beside his wife. Together, they rearranged the flowers. He whispered something in her ear that made her smile. A real smile this time. Then he stood, helped her to her feet, and turned toward the crowd. "Delilah organized this entire thing," he said, voice calm but deep, like velvet over iron. "Every dollar raised today goes to give kids a shot at creativity, at dignity. She built this from scratch. I just showed up." The air went quiet. "I'm lucky to be her husband," he continued. Not the other way around. No applause. Just eyes darting, wine glasses trembling slightly, and the undeniable weight of truth settling in everyone's chest. But Delilah didn't gloat. She didn't change expression. She just turned, nodded to the musicians to begin, and walked to the next table like nothing happened. That was the thing about her power. It didn't roar. It unfolded. Later that afternoon, as the guests trickled out, Eloise lingered. She approached Delilah with the tightest of smiles. "I hope you don't take things too personally. We all come from different worlds." Delilah looked at her. "You're right. We do. Mine taught me not to judge someone by the size of their wallet. Yours taught you something else." Eloise flushed, lips pursed. Shaq appeared beside Delilah, placing a hand gently on her back. "Drive safe now," he said. "I hear privilege makes the roads slick." Eloise turned without another word. As the last car rolled away, Delilah and Shaq sat on the porch swing. The sun had started to dip behind the tree line. Her head leaned on his shoulder. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Delilah's voice came soft. "I'm tired of being mistaken for less than what I am." Shaq exhaled slowly. "Then it's time they found out who you really are." And just like that, the afternoon closed like a chapter too rich to forget. The laughter had faded. The glasses were cleared, and the truth heavy, necessary, and still unfolding, hung between them like a promise unspoken. The champagne flutes clinked, but so did the knives behind fake smiles. The last car had vanished down the long stone drive, and twilight draped itself lazily over the O'Neal estate. The laughter and violins had faded, replaced by a stillness that should have brought relief. But the air felt too tight, like something had been left unfinished, unsaid, unchallenged. The scent of lavender hung in the breeze, but it couldn't mask the sourness lingering in Shaq's chest. The staff worked quietly, clearing plates and folding linens. Delilah had excused herself upstairs, claiming she needed a shower, but Shaq could feel it, the weight she carried in her silence. He didn't need her to say it. He saw it in the way she smiled too much, how her hands trembled slightly when no one was looking. The day had taken its toll, and he hated that he'd let it happen. Shaq wandered back out onto the patio, drawn by the distant sound of murmurs. At first he thought maybe the catering team was wrapping up. But the voices were wrong. Too familiar, too polished. It was Eloise St. Clair, sharp-voiced and sugar-dipped, huddled with two other guests in the glass-walled sunroom near the garden. They hadn't realized anyone remained outside, especially not him. He moved closer, silent on the stone steps, his height obscured by the edge of the pergola and the trailing vines above. Inside, the women sipped from crystal flutes like they were toasting each other's wickedness. "She poured my drink like she worked a shift at Waffle House," Eloise said, setting down her glass with a dainty clink. "I nearly tipped her out of habit." Laughter rippled. "Oh please," chimed in the woman in emerald. Shaq vaguely remembered her as some oil heiress's second wife. "I honestly thought she was one of the event staff until someone said her name." "Delilah, was it?" "Sounds like a hairdresser, not a housewife." Eloise smirked, swirling her flute. "Delilah O'Neal. What a plot twist. Street girl turned Cinderella. The only glass slipper she wore probably came from a strip mall. Another round of laughter, quieter now. Almost like they knew it was wrong, but the champagne made it feel safe. She definitely married up, said the third woman, blonde with a hollow laugh. I mean, come on, Shaquille O'Neal. That's a whole empire. And she what? Smiles pretty? Keeps a neat table? I give it 5 years before she trades that backyard for a reality TV deal and an NDA. Shaq stood still, the words slicing deeper than he expected. It wasn't that they doubted her. People always talked, but it was the ease with which they dismissed her humanity, reduced her to a stereotype, a caricature, a trophy that didn't shine enough. He had known judgment his whole life, but something about them targeting Delilah, his Delilah, with their careless cruelty, it settled in his bones like a splinter too small to pull out, but too deep to ignore. She doesn't belong here, Eloise whispered, tone lowering now that the jokes had cooled. And it showed. Shaq stepped back, his jaw locked, breath held. He didn't speak, not yet. He turned, walked slowly back inside, his steps measured. He wanted to shatter their glasses. He wanted to make them say it again to his face this time. But more than that, he wanted to understand why Delilah hadn't said anything, why she took it all in stride, like rain on a windshield, why she let people mistake her kindness for weakness. Inside, the lights were dimmed. The scent of vanilla soap trailed faintly from the staircase. Shaq found her in the den, curled into the corner of the sectional, hair damp, robe loose, at the collar. She didn't look up as he entered. Her eyes were fixed on the fireplace, unlit but flickering with old memory. I heard them, he said, sitting beside her. She didn't pretend not to know what he meant. She just closed her eyes for a long moment, then nodded once. They always say the same things. I've just learned to stop caring. You don't have to take that, he said, voice low, barely hiding the anger underneath. They don't know you. They don't know what you've been through. She turned to him, her voice calm, almost resigned. They don't want to know me, Shaq. They just want to explain me. Make sense of me in ways that keep their world untouched. I'm either a gold digger or a charity case. There's no version of me that fits into their definition of deserving. He studied her face. It wasn't just sadness there. It was history. Battle-worn patience. A fire that had long been taught to flicker, not roar. Then let me say something, he said. Let me shut that down. Publicly. She shook her head. Don't. That's exactly what they want. A scene. A moment they can twist into the angry black man defending his fragile wife. They'll spin it. They always do. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. But why stay silent? You're not ashamed of who you are. You've never needed to hide. Delilah hesitated, fingers tightening around the edge of her robe. Then, softly, like lifting a lid she hadn't opened in years, she said, There's more you don't know. He turned to her, brow furrowed. I haven't told you everything about my family, she admitted, about where I really came from, what I left behind. Shaq didn't push. He waited. I wasn't born Delilah James, she said. That name came later. After the foster care system. After my mom died. Before that, I was Delilah Whitmore. Shaq blinked, surprised. The name sounded vaguely familiar. An old dynasty maybe. A name he'd heard in passing on a news ticker or a business magazine. My mother was the youngest daughter of Esther Whitmore, she continued. Yes, that Whitmore. Steel railroads, land. The ones who used to own half of South Carolina and probably still own the other half on paper. Shaq sat back slowly, absorbing. My mother got pregnant young, out of wedlock, with a black man. Her voice didn't shake. She'd clearly rehearsed this conversation 1,000 times in her mind. The family cut her off. They erased her. Me too. Pretended we didn't exist. She never spoke to them again. We moved around, scraped by. She waited tables, cleaned houses, got sick too young. Shaq reached for her hand. She let him. I never wanted anything from them, she said. Not their apology, not their money, definitely not their approval. And I still don't. But they owe you, Shaq said quietly. They owe you your name, your place. Delilah shook her head. They can keep the name. I made mine. I just never told you because I didn't want to drag all that into our life. I didn't want to be that woman, the one with baggage, the one they said only got lucky. But they say it anyway, he said. Whether it's true or not. Exactly, she whispered. That's the point. The truth doesn't matter to people like the St. Clairs. What matters is the narrative. And I refuse to let them write mine. Shaq looked at her, and in that moment, the love he felt for her went deeper than he knew words could carry. Not just for her resilience, but for her clarity. For her refusal to become a performance for someone else's comfort. What do you want me to do? He asked finally. Wait, she said. Let them talk. Let them laugh. Let them write me off. Because one day, I will show them exactly who I am. And when I do, I want their jaws to drop so hard, they forget how to speak. Shaq smiled, not out of joy but pride. Pride wrapped in fire. Then I'll wait, he said. But when that day comes, let me be the one holding the mic. Delilah chuckled softly, leaning her head on his shoulder. Deal. Outside, the sunroom was now empty. The crystal glasses had been gathered, but the echoes of their laughter lingered like smoke in a room that had once burned. And upstairs, in a locked drawer beneath Delilah's vanity, an envelope rested, thick, ivory, sealed with a golden crest. The name etched in calligraphy across the front read, Delilah Ann Whitmore. Unopened, forgotten. But not for long. One photo, one name, one empire, buried in a drawer for years. It started with a sweater. Just a gray, half-zipped cotton pullover Shaq had seen Delilah wear during their first winter together in Atlanta. He was rummaging through her side of the walk-in closet looking for it, thinking maybe she'd want it tonight. It was colder than usual, and she always complained about how the draft got into her bones when she was tired. But what he found instead, tucked inside a faded shoebox behind a stack of old purses, wasn't clothing at all. It was a photograph, creased at the corners, faded around the edges, but the image still held a strange sort of defiant clarity. In the photo, a little girl, no more than 6, stood on the steps of a sweeping southern estate, grand and white-pillared, with a black iron gate open in the distance. The words Whitmore Estate were carved into the stone at the foot of the long brick driveway. The girl wore a frilly yellow dress and black patent shoes, her hair in tight curls, a small bow at her temple, and though the photo had aged, her face hadn't changed. It was Delilah, clear as day, standing in front of a home she'd never once mentioned. Shaq stared at the picture, one thick thumb tracing the shape of the house behind her. There was something about it, something that didn't align with the Delilah he knew. Not the modest girl from Savannah she'd always claimed to be. Not the orphan raised by the system. Not the woman who'd built everything she had from the ground up. When she came in 10 minutes later, towel wrapped around her hair, still wiping lotion into her arms, she stopped mid-step when she saw what he was holding. You went through my things? She asked, not angry, more stunned, like the past had reached up and grabbed her by the wrist. I was looking for your gray sweater, he said, holding the photo gently. And I found this instead. She didn't move. Her eyes landed on the image, like it had opened a wound she'd long ago decided to let scab over. Delilah, he said carefully, why have you never told me about this place? She walked to the edge of the bed, sat down without answering, and took the picture from him. Her fingers shook slightly as she held it. That was the last day I ever stepped foot on that property. Shaq sat beside her, quiet but present. He could feel it, something heavy was coming. Something stitched into her silence for too long. My mother was disowned when she got pregnant with me, Delilah said. She was the youngest daughter of Esther Whitmore, the matriarch of one of the wealthiest families in the South. The Whitmores owned land, steel, railroads, pretty much everything from here to the Carolina coast, and they were proud. Proud of their name, their bloodline, their legacy, until my mother messed that up. She paused, eyes still on the girl in the picture. She fell in love with a man named Kenneth, a black man, a good man, but not one they'd ever accept. When she refused to terminate the pregnancy, they threw her out. No warning, no conversation, just exile. She lost everything, her inheritance, her trust, her name, and she never looked back. Shaq let it sit for a moment before asking, and you? Delilah took a deep breath. I was born in a tiny hospital outside Augusta. No Whitmore name, just baby girl James. That's the name she gave me when she registered for public assistance. When I was 5, she took me back to the estate to try and speak to her mother. One last try. That's the day this photo was taken, before the gate was slammed shut in our faces. I didn't understand it then. I thought we were visiting Grandma, but my mother cried the whole way home. Shaq looked at her with a new lens. All the moments that had never made sense, The way she brushed past questions about her childhood. The way she kept her distance from legacy and lineage. The fire in her when people mistook her for someone reaching above her station. It all traced back to this. What happened after, he asked. She changed our last name, moved us downstate, worked nights, cleaned houses. I never knew my father. He died when I was 3. Hit and run. She never talked about it. By the time I was a teenager, she was sick. Real sick. I spent most of high school bouncing between homes. After she passed, I was technically a ward of the state, but I aged out fast and took care of myself. Got jobs, hustled, paid my way through community college, then design school. She let out a soft, bitter laugh. All while the Whitmores sat behind that iron gate, pretending we didn't exist. Shaq leaned back, exhaling slowly. So, you're a Whitmore. By blood, she said. But not by name. Not by choice. Why never tell me? Delilah looked at him then, raw and vulnerable. Because I never wanted to be defined by where I came from. I worked too hard building this life. I didn't want anyone to say I got here, because of some inheritance or some family name I never used. I didn't want you looking at me like I was one of them. Shaq turned to face her fully. Delilah, you think I care about some old name? You think I married you for your resume? No, she said quietly. But I've spent my whole life being misjudged. I didn't want the one person who really saw me to start second-guessing what he saw. He reached for her hand. What I see is the strongest woman I know. The woman who gives more than she takes, who built a business from nothing, who never asked for anything she didn't earn. But baby, this part of your past, it matters. Not because of the money, because of what they tried to take from you. Delilah looked down again at the picture. They didn't just take money, they took history, identity. They erased my mother like she was a stain. Then maybe, Shaq said slowly, it's time they were reminded. She turned her eyes to him, uncertain. Why now? Because I heard what they said at the brunch, he said. I heard how they talked about you, how they laughed like you were lucky to be here. But you're not lucky. You're owed. And not just by some trust fund, but by the narrative. You've been silent too long. Maybe it's time you reclaimed your story. Delilah stood and walked to the dresser. She opened the bottom drawer, pulling out a leather folio that had gone untouched for years. Inside were birth records, old letters, and a sealed envelope with a golden crest, the Whitmore family seal. I've never opened this, she said, holding the envelope gently. It came the week after my mother died, from their attorney. I couldn't. I didn't want their charity. I was angry. Still am. Shaq stood behind her. Maybe it's not charity. Maybe it's your leverage. She looked at him in the mirror. Both of them reflected side by side, her past and her present in one frame. She nodded slowly, the decision taking root like a seed breaking open. I'll open it tomorrow, she said, but not because I want anything from them, because I want the truth. And whatever's inside, Shaq said, placing his hand on her shoulder, we face it together. That night, the photo sat on the dresser, the little girl frozen in time, smiling in front of a house that had once slammed its gates against her future. But the frame no longer felt like a relic. It felt like a map, a breadcrumb from a story unfinished. And in the stillness of the room, beneath the soft hum of night sounds outside, a quiet promise was born. The past may have been buried, but it had never died. And soon, the Whitmores would remember the name they tried so hard to forget. The Whitmore name was sacred and cursed. The morning after the photo surfaced, something had shifted in the house. Not visibly. The walls were the same. The air still smelled like coffee and wood polish. But there was a hum beneath everything now, like the house was holding its breath. In the quiet, Delilah sat at the dining table, the unopened Whitmore envelope in her hands. The seal was still unbroken, gold wax stamped with a crest she hadn't seen since childhood. It was a lion and a torch, framed by iron branches. She used to trace it with her finger on the books her mother had hidden from the family's past. Shaq was at the kitchen island, stirring oatmeal like he wasn't watching her, though he was. Every flick of her finger, every sigh, every time she shifted in her chair, he caught it all. She didn't open the letter that morning either. Instead, she told him everything. Not just the version she'd shared the night before, but the full, unfiltered account. How Esther Whitmore, her grandmother, had been one of the most powerful industrialists in the South during the 70s, and how she was hailed in magazines, and whispered about in country clubs. Revered, feared, but always respected, and how she'd vanished from public view a decade ago, after a scandal that rocked the family from the inside. She was the kind of woman who built empires with her eyes, Delilah said, her voice flat, hands wrapped tight around a coffee mug, and destroyed lives with a phone call. Delilah's mother, Celeste Whitmore, had been the youngest of 3 daughters. She was the wild one, the dreamer, the soft-hearted rebel in a family where emotions were an inconvenience. When she fell for Kenneth James, an artist, a black man, and everything the Whitmores despised, Esther gave her a choice, the family or the man. Celeste chose love, and for that she lost everything. Her trust fund was revoked, her name scrubbed from records, her face removed from family portraits. She was declared legally dead by her own kin. They cut her out like a tumor. Delilah said. She gave up $1 billion legacy for the chance to raise me in peace, but they never really let her be. She got letters, warnings, even threats. She told me once that if she ever tried to come back, they'd ruin her completely. So she stayed gone. Shaq listened, rage rising, not from the story, but from the restraint in her voice. She wasn't angry anymore. She was tired, and that exhaustion was more haunting than fury. Delilah, he said, crossing to sit across from her, you keep saying you don't want anything from them. But this isn't about getting something. This is about restoring something. She looked up. What do you mean? You said they erased your mother, scrubbed her out like she was never part of them. That's not just cruel, it's theft. They stole her name, your history, and whether you like it or not, there's a part of you they couldn't erase. You're still Whitmore blood. She let that sit for a moment, then shook her head. So what? You want me to fight for a seat at a table I was never welcome at? I want you to flip the table, Shaq said. It was the first time she smiled all morning. Brief, small, but real. Later that day, while Delilah worked from her home office, Shaq made some calls. Not to lawyers, not yet, but to a man he knew from his NBA days. Wallace Green, a retired journalist turned corporate researcher, who had built a side hustle tracking down buried secrets for the rich and powerful. If there were bones under the Whitmore mansion, Wallace would know where they were buried. Within hours, Wallace had sent back 3 scanned articles, 2 blurry photographs, and 1 note. Delilah Whitmore was not just erased. She was replaced. Esther's official line was that her daughter died in a car crash in 1990. But there's no record of that crash. No police report. No obituary. And I found a lawsuit filed in '92 by a Kenneth James dismissed quietly, sealed by the court. That kind of thing doesn't happen unless someone wanted it to disappear. Shaq read every word 3 times. Delilah had always believed the family simply ignored her mother's existence. But this was next level. A full fabrication of death to mask a scandal, and it raised bigger questions. Who else knew what was in the sealed lawsuit? Why had it been hidden so well? He didn't tell her everything yet, just that Wallace was digging, and that more truth was coming. Delilah nodded, wary. She didn't need all the answers now, just the strength to confront them when they came. That night, as the house settled into its late evening hush, Shaq took a drive, alone. No driver, no noise, just him and the steering wheel, his mind spinning. He ended up in front of the mansion from the photograph. The gates were still there, same wrought iron design, same stone archway engraved with Whitmore Estate, but the house looked faded, not abandoned exactly, but not alive either, like a relic waiting to be reborn. He sat there for a long while, then got out. A tall man in a suit greeted him at the gate. Security. Polished but distant. Shaq didn't flinch. I'm here on behalf of Delilah Whitmore, he said simply. Her grandmother lives here, doesn't she? The man's eyes narrowed. Mrs. Whitmore doesn't take visitors. And we don't acknowledge that name. Shaq smirked. You're gonna have to start. Before the man could respond, a voice from the intercom above crackled. Let him see the garden. The gate buzzed open. Shaq walked the grounds quietly. The estate was beautiful in that cold, imposing way old money often was. Manicured hedges, fountains that gurgled like they were whispering secrets, statues with blank eyes. He reached the rose garden. There, in the center, was a white marble bench, on it a bronze plaque. In memory of Celeste Ann Whitmore. Forever cherished, forever silenced. Shaq crouched to read it again. Forever silenced. That wasn't grief. That was branding, control, guilt disguised as tribute. He returned home just past midnight. Delilah was still awake, curled up on the couch in sweats, watching a documentary on muted volume. She looked up, startled but calm. "You went there," she said, no question in her voice. Shaq nodded. "It's real. The house. The garden. The plaque." She swallowed. "They acknowledged her?" "Kind of. They buried her without a body. Without truth. They called her memory sacred, while scrubbing her name from everything else. It's fake mourning. For show. For control." Delilah looked away. "That's all they ever wanted." Shaq stepped closer. "Then take it back. Not their money. Not their pity. Take back the narrative. Your mother didn't disappear. She was erased. That's different." Delilah stood slowly, walked over to the drawer where the envelope waited. She picked it up, and finally broke the seal. Inside was a typed letter, dated nearly a decade ago. It was short, cold, and final. "Delilah, it is unfortunate that your mother's decisions created the circumstances we all had to endure. I hope that you've made peace with your situation, and I trust you will respect the boundaries that must remain in place. E. Whitmore." Below that, clipped neatly, was a statement from the family trust. It listed her name, Delilah A. Whitmore, as a legal beneficiary. She wasn't removed. She had never been removed. Delilah looked up, face stone still. "So all these years, she wrote me off emotionally, but left the money untouched." Shaq exhaled. "Because erasing you legally would have risked exposure, public fallout. But emotionally, that she could do in private, no questions asked." Delilah's hands trembled. "They didn't just erase my mother. They branded her. And they branded me without ever using ink." Shaq took the papers, flipping them once more. "This isn't over. You still have legal standing. You're still part of the trust. And that means you have leverage." "I don't want their money," she snapped, then caught herself. "I want them to say my mother's name out loud. I want them to look me in the eye and admit what they did. I want them to see that I lived despite them." "Then let's make that happen," Shaq said. "Not for revenge, for justice." The envelope sat open between them. For the first time in years, the past was no longer locked away. It was alive, buzzing, full of questions, and Delilah wasn't afraid anymore. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the trees. Inside, the silence broke. And somewhere deep in the halls of the Whitmore estate, a legacy that thought it had sealed its secrets began to crack open. Shaq walks into their lair and smiles. The steakhouse was the kind that didn't advertise. No signage, no website, no menu online. It was the sort of place where billionaires whispered over bone-in ribeyes and sealed shady deals beneath the flicker of vintage chandeliers. Shaq had been here once, years ago, with a sports agent who got nervous when the bill crossed 5 figures. This time, he wasn't nervous. He was hunting. He wore a charcoal jacket over an open-collar shirt. No tie. Clean cut. Presentable, but not polished. He didn't want to look like he was trying to belong. He wanted them to wonder if he did. The maitre d' led him to a private glass-walled room tucked in the back, framed by wine bottles and dim candlelight. Seated inside were Chadwick St. Clair and his wife Eloise, flanked by 2 associates from their real estate investment firm, all sipping from long-stemmed glasses and laughing the way people do when they believe no one's listening. "Shaquille," Chadwick said, standing up and extending a hand with mock enthusiasm. "Didn't expect to hear from you so soon. You sure you're ready to talk investment?" Shaq smiled as he took the seat across from them. "Let's call it a conversation. I like to know who I'm dealing with before putting my name on anything." Eloise laughed lightly, twirling her bracelet. "Well, that's just good business. Shall we order some wine?" Shaq waved it off. "I'm good with water. Long day." They made small talk. Chadwick laid out a proposal for a new luxury condo development in the Beltline district. Shaq nodded at all the right moments. He asked the sort of questions that made them think he was mildly impressed. He let them talk. Let them glow. Let them sell themselves like their image hadn't been dragged through the dirt in his own backyard, just days ago. "So tell us," Eloise said at one point, leaning forward, her voice sugared with fake charm. "What made you reach out to us directly? You've got your pick of firms in this town." Shaq leaned back, clasping his hands together. "I'm a man who believes in redemption. Second chances. You know, giving people the opportunity to show who they really are." Chadwick chuckled. "Well, we do pride ourselves on clean slates." "I figured," Shaq said smoothly. "After all, you were so quick to forget Delilah." The air snapped tight. Even the sommelier, mid-pour at the next table, faltered. Eloise's smile held, but her voice stiffened. I'm sorry. Delilah? Shaq didn't blink. My wife. You remember. From the brunch. You spoke with her. Or at her. Really. Chadwick shifted. Ah. Yes. She was lovely. Shaq tilted his head slightly. You called her a waitress. Eloise's lips twitched. That was a misunderstanding. You said she married up. That she didn't belong. Shaq continued, still calm. You laughed at her. You mocked her. You made jokes about where she came from. Chadwick's voice dropped. Shaquille, let's not turn this into something it isn't. It was a social event. People joke. There's no malice. There was racism, Shaq said, his tone low and unshaken. And there was arrogance. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a pattern. One of the associates cleared his throat. I'm sure your wife's lovely, but this seems a bit off topic. I haven't gotten to the topic yet, Shaq said, now sitting forward. See, I didn't ask you here for condos. I asked you here because I wanted to see how fast you'd run when you realized who my wife really is. Eloise folded her arms. We know who she is. No, he said. You don't. He reached into his jacket and slid a folded sheet across the table. It was a scanned copy of the Whitmore Trust beneficiary list. The name Delilah A. Whitmore highlighted in yellow. Not Delilah James. Not Delilah O'Neal. Whitmore. Chadwick glanced at it, his face going pale. Eloise stared like the paper might catch fire. She's the granddaughter of Esther Whitmore, Shaq said, and she never needed to marry me to move up. She already had more legacy than either of you could dream of. She just chose to walk away from it, because she knew the kind of people it attracted. Eloise's voice cracked under the weight of pressure. That's impossible. Esther only had 2 daughters. 3. Shaq interrupted. The youngest, Celeste. Disowned. Erased. Buried in lies. And she gave birth to Delilah, who you treated like trash in her own home. Chadwick leaned back, his jaw twitching. If that were true, why haven't we heard about it? Why isn't she part of the estate? Why hasn't the family ever acknowledged her? Shaq smiled. Because people like you write history for each other. You only see what you're allowed to see. But trust me, truth doesn't go away just because you pretend it never existed. The second associate shifted in his chair. Okay, even if this is real, what exactly do you want from us? Shaq's eyes locked in. I want you to know exactly how wrong you were. I want you to sit with that. I want every dinner party, every gala, every cocktail hour you attend to echo with the fact that you mocked a woman who comes from more than any of you ever will. But more than that, I want you to understand that you can't erase people just because they make you uncomfortable. Eloise was no longer pretending. This feels like a threat. Shaq stood slowly. It's a correction. If I wanted to threaten you, I'd do it with lawyers, or headlines, or both. But I'm not here for blood. I'm here for clarity. And next time you think about opening your mouths at someone else's expense, remember that not everyone stays silent forever. He turned, adjusting his cuff. You really think anyone will believe this? Chadwick called after him. You think she can just walk back into that world and claim what she wants? You think she belongs in our circle? Shaq paused at the door. She doesn't want your circle. She's building her own. And trust me, you won't be invited. The door closed behind him with a hush of air and finality. Back in the car, Shaq called Delilah. She answered on the second ring. You okay? She asked. I'm good, he said. They know now. And it hit them hard. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, did you tell them everything? No, he said. Just enough to make them squirm. The rest? That's yours to tell, when you're ready. He could hear her exhale. A slow release. I'm not sure I want to step into that world, she said quietly. You don't have to, Shaq replied. But the point is, you could, and that's what they're afraid of. That night, Delilah pulled the documents from the folder and laid them out on the dining table. Shaq watched as she stared down the pages like they were ghosts. She wasn't planning revenge. She wasn't plotting a hostile takeover of the Whitmore fortune. She was reclaiming her name, her story, and every step forward was another page ripped from the false history the elite had written over her. Back at the restaurant, the St. Clairs sat frozen, the wine untouched, the room colder than it had been an hour ago. For the first time in their curated privilege-wrapped lives, they'd been handed a truth they couldn't spin. And it was just the beginning. I hope one day you'll claim what's yours. Not for me. For you. Esther Whitmore. Shaq lowered the page slowly. The weight of the words pulling down on his chest like gravity had doubled. Delilah sat on the edge of the bed, fingers clenched in her lap. She wrote this, Delilah said, and then never sent it. Maybe she couldn't bring herself to, Shaq replied. Maybe she thought it was too late. Delilah shook her head. She left me in limbo. This letter was her confession, and she buried it with scarves. But she didn't destroy it, Shaq said. And that means something. By the next morning, they were seated across from a man named August Hale, the Whitmore family's longtime legal counsel. He operated out of a nondescript office on the edge of Atlanta, more archives than ambiance. His suit was old but pressed, and his handshake was the kind you remember, not because of strength, but because of weight. I've been expecting this day for a long time, he said once they were seated. And I won't pretend I didn't have a role in delaying it. Delilah remained quiet, arms folded tightly across her chest. Your mother was never removed from the trust, Hale explained. She was publicly disowned, yes, but legally, Esther never filed the paperwork. She made a great show of severing ties, but behind closed doors, she stalled. Why? Shaq asked. Guilt. Ego. A combination of both, I imagine. Hale tapped a folder in front of him. But in 2003 she amended the trust. Without anyone's knowledge, she created a sub-trust, irrevocable, naming you, Delilah Ann Whitmore, as a sole beneficiary, a clause hidden under estate diversification. No one questioned it, because it didn't raise red flags on the balance sheets. Delilah blinked. And what does that mean exactly? It means, Hale said, sliding the folder across the table, that you are legally entitled to 15% of the Whitmore estate, not in stock options, in land. Property. Tangible holdings. Your grandmother made sure of it. Shaq let out a slow breath. But there's a catch, Hale continued. To access the trust, you must legally reassert the Whitmore name. Delilah's breath caught. I have to become her again. You have to become who she knew you were, Hale said, and by doing so, you'll stir a hornet's nest. Shaq leaned forward. The board? Livid. When they find out. Esther kept secrets for decades. Secrets they will not want. Unearthed. You'll be challenging more than paperwork. You'll be challenging legacy, myth, control. Delilah looked at the folder but didn't open it. I never wanted their money. Then don't take it for the money, Hale said. Take it because they tried to erase you. And because someone like you, someone who built herself from the ground up, shouldn't have to hide from her own truth just to survive. There was a long silence. A charged one. Finally, Delilah said, I need time. You have it, Hale replied. But not forever. The board has begun estate restructuring. If they discover the clause before you activate it, they'll find a way to bury it, legally or otherwise. They left the office without speaking much. The car ride was quiet, filled with the sound of the city rolling by. It wasn't until they were halfway home that Delilah finally whispered, If I do this, I'm stepping into a world I turned my back on. I'll be facing people who think I'm an intruder in a house they stole from my mother. Shaq kept his eyes on the road. So step in like you own it. Because you do. She looked out the window. What if I lose myself in that world? He reached over and took her hand. Then I'll remind you who you are. Every damn day. That night, Delilah didn't sleep. She stood in her home office, surrounded by her own work. Blueprints, mood boards, fabric samples, photos from past interior design projects. Everything she'd built with her own two hands. Not a Whitmore dime in sight. She opened the folder from Hale, skimmed the documents, memorized every line. Then she took out the letter from Esther and read it again. And for the first time she let herself feel the grief she had buried with her mother. The ache of what could have been, the fury of what was taken, the impossible task of forgiving someone who asked too late. But still she didn't burn it. By morning, her decision had formed like a stone settling in her chest. She didn't want a throne. She wanted a reckoning. And she was finally ready to claim it. They invited her to humiliate her. She showed up in diamonds of silence. The invitation arrived folded between pages of a glossy magazine in a silver-embossed envelope. Hand-delivered by a courier who didn't meet Delilah's eyes. No return address, just the words, You are cordially invited to the St. Clair Foundation Winter Gala. The paper smelled like money and desperation, and both Shaq and Delilah knew exactly what it meant. They want to save face, Shaq muttered, tossing the invite onto the kitchen island. Backpedal. Control the damage. Delilah studied the thick card without touching it. No. They want a show. He turned to her. You don't have to go. We owe them nothing. She was quiet for a long time. Then, if they expect a performance, I'll give them one. Just not the kind they plan. The gala was held at the Bancroft, an old cathedral-turned-events hall, in downtown Atlanta, where the ceilings soared and the acoustics whispered secrets. Guests arrived in Teslas, Maybachs and quiet confidence, dressed like royalty, with names like Prescott and Livingston trailing from their lips. It was a night for power to congratulate itself, the sort of evening where bloodlines mattered more than belief. Delilah wore a gown the color of wet slate, simple, sleeveless, floor-length, no sparkle, no plunging neckline, just precision. Her hair was slicked back into a low chignon, and around her neck rested a diamond pendant shaped like a single drop of water. It wasn't flashy, but it was real, and old. It had belonged to her mother. Shaq, in a black tuxedo with an open collar, didn't hover. He walked beside her, not ahead, not behind, letting her lead without asking for it. When they stepped into the main ballroom, the music faltered for a beat. Conversations dipped into murmurs. Eyes flicked, elbows nudged, champagne paused mid-sip. They were not expecting her to show. They certainly weren't expecting her to look like this, composed, deliberate, untouchable. Eloise St. Clair, in shimmering silver, beelined toward them with a smile carved in tension. "Darling," she breathed, reaching for Delilah's hands. "You look well." Delilah didn't flinch. "That's because I am." And Shaq heel, Eloise pivoted. "You clean up so well. We're just so delighted you came." Shaq returned the smile with practiced indifference. "Let's call it curiosity." Chadwick appeared behind his wife, flanked by other board members of the St. Clair Foundation. Their eyes skated across Delilah like they were still trying to place her, still refusing to see her. "We're honored you accepted our invitation," Chadwick said stiffly. "We were concerned there might be tension." "Nothing tension can't resolve with the truth," Delilah replied, her voice like silk cut with glass. As the evening unfolded, the whispers turned venomous beneath the elegance. A woman in a green velvet gown made a loud comment near the bar about new money and borrowed jewels. A man beside the dessert table chuckled to a friend. "She looks the part, but let's see if she can play it." It was clear the St. Clairs had set a trap. Invite her, box her into visibility, then watch her stumble under scrutiny. The real performance was never supposed to come from her. It was supposed to come from them, applauding her presence while subtly dismantling it with charm and polite cruelty. Halfway through the night, Eloise took the microphone on stage. "Before we begin our formal presentation," she purred, "we'd like to acknowledge a very special guest, a woman who has recently claimed ties to one of Georgia's most storied families, Miss Delilah James." A sharp pause. "Or rather, Delilah Whitmore." Some clapped. Most didn't. Eloise gestured toward a small table near the front of the stage. "We've received some documents that cast intriguing light on this claim, and we thought transparency was best served here and now." A man stepped forward from the shadows beside the stage, a smug-looking paralegal carrying a manila folder. Shaq took a step forward, but Delilah stopped him with a hand on his arm. She didn't blink as the paralegal pulled out a set of photocopied documents, placing them on the podium. "Our review of the Whitmore family records shows no legal documentation of an heir named Delilah Ann Whitmore," he said. "There are sealed files, yes, but nothing publicly substantiated. We do not believe the claim is valid." A hush swept through the room. Someone coughed. Someone else gasped. Eloise smiled like a predator. "Of course we welcome Delilah to clarify." Delilah stepped forward, not to the stage, but to the center of the floor. Her voice didn't rise. She didn't defend herself. She simply said, "You really should have done better homework." At that moment, the ballroom doors opened again. A new figure entered, cutting through the crowd like a knife through ribbon. August Hale, the Whitmore estate attorney, walked toward the stage with a briefcase in one hand and a grim expression carved into his face. He moved like a man carrying truth and daring someone to stop him. He handed Eloise a set of stamped documents. Certified records from the private amendments to the Whitmore Family Trust, authorized by Esther Whitmore herself. This includes notarized evidence of Delilah Ann Whitmore's legal claim to 15% of the estate, complete with DNA confirmation, birth certificate amendments, and court-protected documents previously sealed due to family discretion. He turned to the room. his voice firm. Delilah is not just an heir. She is the sole living descendant of Esther's youngest daughter, Celeste. She is exactly who she says she is. You could feel the air fracture. Eloise tried to speak. Chadwick looked as though someone had just handed him the obituary of his own influence. Someone clapped, then another, and another. The applause was slow, scattered, but real. Delilah didn't smile. She didn't bow. She didn't even look pleased. She stood quietly, hands at her sides, letting the weight of the truth do all the talking. Later, as the music resumed and the room tried to crawl back into civility, guests approached her. Some offered polite nods. Others mumbled apologies with tight lips. A few, shameless in their reversal, suddenly wanted to talk legacy, charity, investments. Delilah entertained none of it. She stood with Shaq near the far column, looking out across the room, like a woman watching the last scene of a play she never auditioned for. You didn't gloat, he said quietly. That would have made me one of them, she replied. He nodded. You good? I'm ready. To walk away? No, she said. To walk forward. As they exited the building, the St. Clair stood near the entrance, hands clasped like they were clinging to their own relevance. Delilah, Eloise called after her. For what it's worth, we didn't know. Delilah turned, eyes steady. You didn't want to know. There's a difference. The cold night air met them as they stepped onto the sidewalk. The moonlight caught the pendant around Delilah's neck and made it shimmer like fire. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't demanded a thing, and yet she had flipped the room, upended a dynasty of doubt with one truth, one name, and an unshakable sense of self. They had invited her to be embarrassed. She had left them exposed, and not one jewel on her gown needed to sparkle to do it. But there was no portrait of Celeste, no image of the daughter who'd been erased. Delilah walked slowly, the sound of her heels swallowed by thick carpet. She stopped in front of a space on the wall that was slightly brighter than the rest. A ghost frame, an outline of something that had once hung but had been removed. She said nothing, just stared. She never allowed Celeste's portrait to hang, August said behind her. But when she passed, I found one wrapped in cloth in the attic. I thought, you might want to see it. He motioned to a large crate, propped near the door. Carefully, he pulled off the covering and revealed the painting. Celeste in her early 20s, holding baby Delilah in her lap. Her eyes were full of quiet joy, defiant softness. Delilah stepped closer, her throat tightened. She looked happy here. She was, August said. For a moment, until she wasn't allowed to be anymore. The silence that followed was deep, pressurized, until a new voice broke it. She always loved that dress, the blue one she's wearing. Delilah turned sharply. A woman stood in the doorway, mid-30s, honey brown curls, tan skin, eyes that looked too much like hers to be coincidence. August stepped forward. Delilah, this is Genevieve Whitmore, your cousin, daughter of Elaine Whitmore, Esther's middle child. Genevieve stepped inside carefully, her expression uncertain but open. I've wanted to meet you for a long time, but I didn't know how to reach out without sounding like an imposter. Delilah narrowed her eyes. You knew about me. I suspected, Genevieve said. I heard whispers, found a few letters in my mother's closet. She hated what happened to Celeste. She just didn't have the spine to stand up to Esther. None of them did. Shaq stepped closer, watchful. Genevieve looked between them. I'm not here for anything. No drama, no inheritance games. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For what? Delilah asked. For letting you grow up thinking you were alone. Delilah took a breath. I wasn't alone. My mother made sure of that. Genevieve nodded. Still, we should have done more. They stood there in quiet acknowledgement, not enemies but not exactly family either. Just two women holding the weight of a bloodline that had never deserved them. I heard about the gala, Genevieve said softly. What you did. It was powerful. I didn't do it for power. I know, Genevieve said. That's what made it powerful. August cleared his throat, stepping between them. There's something else we need to discuss. The estate. The land. The board assumed Delilah would take it quietly, convert it into a holding. But she has another idea. Delilah turned to face them fully. Her voice didn't waver. I'm donating it, she said. The main house, the east garden, the lake cabins, all of it. It's going to become a residential education center for underprivileged girls, especially those aging out of foster care. They'll live here, learn here, be seen here. August looked unsurprised. Genevieve's brows lifted. Shaq smiled. Delilah continued. I won't live in a house that erased my mother, but I will make sure it never erases another girl again. You'll face pushback, Genevieve warned. Lawsuits, obstruction. I've faced worse, Delilah said. I don't need their approval. I just need the deed. August handed her a folder. It's already signed. Esther had a clause. If you accepted the inheritance, you had full discretion over the estate. No board veto. Delilah took the folder and tucked it under her arm. As she turned to leave, she paused in front of Celeste's portrait, reached up, and carefully hung it in the empty frame on the wall. She deserved to be remembered, she said. Then, without another word, she walked out. Back through the cold hallway, past the glass windows and polished marble, out the front door that, this time, opened just for her. As the sun crept higher in the sky, lighting up the estate in a softer way than memory allowed, Delilah stood at the top of the stairs, breathing in air that finally felt like hers. This house had once been full of silence, of rules, of ghosts. But now, it would be full of voices that had never been allowed to speak. It would be full of new stories, new names, and most importantly, new beginnings. She never needed to prove herself, but now they finally see her. The headlines rolled out quietly at first. A single column in a regional business magazine, then a tweet from a journalist who'd been tipped by someone inside the Whitmore legal firm. Then a morning anchor read a story that ended up getting clipped and shared across the country. Shaquille O'Neal's wife inherits billion-dollar Southern estate, launches youth foundation. No interviews, no press conference, no camera-flashing gala. Just truth. Finally stepping into daylight after decades buried beneath old money, older grudges, and a whole family's worth of silence. Delilah never sought the attention, but it came anyway, because you can't quietly turn a racist empire into a refuge for forgotten girls without someone noticing. The Whitmore Foundation for Educational Empowerment, WFE, as it would later be known, was born out of the very estate that once told Delilah she didn't exist. The mansion became a boarding school for under-resourced girls aged 14-18, with programming in entrepreneurship, finance, STEM, and the arts. The cabins by the lake were converted into teacher housing and retreat centers. The Rose Garden, a memorial space dedicated to Celeste Whitmore, and all daughters erased by legacy. Delilah's name never appeared on the brochures, but her fingerprints were on every detail. Shaq was the face the press followed, but even he redirected attention every time. I didn't build it, he told a journalist when asked about the foundation. I married it. I just helped her light the match. Delilah stayed in the background. On purpose. When a Forbes reporter asked why she declined all interview requests, she responded in a single email, "Power isn't something I wear. It's something I use. Quietly, intentionally, and for the ones no one sees coming." Still, the stories kept coming. They wrote about how she declined a seat on the Whitmore board, how she donated her first quarterly inheritance check to build free youth co-working spaces in 5 of Georgia's lowest income zip codes, how she met weekly with a group of teenage girls to workshop college applications and business pitches. They captured photographs of her laughing with young black girls in Whitmore's old solarium, a room once reserved for high society teas, now covered in vision boards and laptop chargers. Her face never made the cover, but her impact did. Meanwhile, the St. Clair scrambled. A new headline circulated weeks after the gala. Power couple under fire for alleged defamation of Shaquille O'Neal's wife at charity gala. Eloise made a half-hearted attempt to release a video apology. Standing in front of her wine cellar, reading from a script, it went viral for all the wrong reasons. Comments poured in calling it tone-deaf damage control and a masterclass in how not to say sorry. Chadwick tried a rebrand, announcing a scholarship fund of his own for urban achievers. But the press smelled the panic, and when Delilah was asked what she thought of their efforts, she simply said, "Let them try. The girls we're raising don't need them anymore." It wasn't revenge, it was irrelevance. And it cut deeper than any comeback ever could. On a mild Saturday afternoon, Delilah stood behind the main house of the estate, now referred to among staff and students as the hearth. The smell of fresh-cut grass and grilled food floated through the spring air. Laughter rang across the lawn as students played pickup basketball and worked on mural paintings that would cover the outer walls of the old stables. Shaq stood a few feet away, surrounded by a group of middle schoolers arguing over fantasy football rankings. One of them looked up and said, "Hey, your wife's a billionaire now, right?" Shaq grinned. She was always one. Y'all just caught up. Delilah shook her head, smiling to herself. Later, they sat together on a bench beneath the same oak tree that used to tower over the Whitmore family's formal garden. Now, it was just a place for students to sit, read, or nap in the shade. There were no fences anymore, no armed guards, just freedom and possibility. Shaq passed her a bottle of water. You ever gonna let them do a piece on you? Tell your whole story? Delilah unscrewed the cap, took a sip, and shook her head. What would I say? That I grew up invisible, and then inherited a billion-dollar name I didn't want, that the ones who ignored me now pretend to cheer for me. I don't need that kind of applause. He studied her. You know they're going to keep telling it anyway. Let them, she said. Let them guess. Let them twist it. I'm not here for them. I'm here for the girls in that kitchen who don't know they're allowed to dream. I'm here for every version of me that thought survival was the same as living. Shaq leaned back. You really are something else. She smiled. So, are you? He looked at her for a long moment, then asked, do you ever regret it? Not stepping into the Whitmore spotlight? You could have taken it all. Made them kneel. Delilah thought about it. About the portrait room. The letter. The estate. About the line she walked between past and future. No, she said finally, because making them kneel would have been about proving something to them. This, she gestured to the property, to the students, to the future in motion. This is about proving something to me. That night, a reporter from the New York Times ran a profile titled, The Billionaire Nobody Noticed. It opened with a single sentence. She came from nothing, inherited everything, and gave it all away to build what money couldn't buy, dignity. The story included a quote from one of the girls at the foundation, a 17-year-old named Ava, who said, Ms. Delilah taught me that silence can be powerful, but only when you're the one choosing it. And that was the difference. Delilah had spent a lifetime being silenced by others, by shame, by legacy, by omission. Now she chose when to speak. She chose when to be seen, and in a world that once mistook her for background noise, she became the quiet storm that changed everything. Not with threats.
Not with noise.
But with grace too heavy to be ignored. In the end, it wasn't money that changed everything. It was love that never wavered. The sun was warm again. Not harsh, but easy, like it had waited all this time to bless the moment. The backyard hadn't changed much. The trees still lined the edge of the fence like guards. The wind still rustled through the branches like it had secrets to tell. And the same old wooden bench sat under the magnolia tree, its paint faded but sturdy as ever. The same bench from that brunch months ago, when the Claires had come dressed in condescension, and Delilah had poured lemonade with a smile that hurt to wear. But now the space felt different, lighter, lived in. Delilah sat cross-legged on the bench, barefoot, sipping sweet tea from a mason jar. Her curls were pinned up messily, and she wore a loose t-shirt and jeans. Nothing fancy, no diamonds, no audience, just her, in the sunlight, at peace in her own skin. Shaq came out carrying 2 sandwiches and a bag of kettle chips, placing them on the table in front of them like he was delivering gold. He sat beside her with a groan, stretching his legs out in front of him. Everything's quieter now, Delilah said after a while. Quieter's good, Shaq replied, tearing open the chips. Quiet means we ain't dodging cameras or lawsuits. It means the fire's out. She smiled at that. Feels like a lifetime ago we were here, trying to make that brunch seem perfect, while getting dissected by every snobby stare in the county. He looked at her. You made it perfect. They just weren't ready to see it. She turned toward him fully. I've been meaning to tell you something. Shaq raised a brow. This about the last cookie again? 'Cause I told you. She laughed, then shook her head. I mean it. Back then when they were coming at me, when I wanted to disappear, you didn't go off. You didn't burn the place down. You held it down, quiet, steady. You let me choose how I wanted to fight. You let me have my voice. Shaq leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You think it was easy not checking Chadwick in the parking lot? Yeah, she said. I know it wasn't. But it mattered more that you stayed grounded. I've had people fight for me before, loud, reckless, temporary. But you fought with truth, and with time, you waited until I was ready, and that changed everything. He shrugged like it wasn't heavy. I just saw you for who you are. The rest of the world catching up was just a matter of patience. Delilah looked down at her hands. You could have made it about you. The headlines tried. Everyone kept calling me Shaq's wife like I didn't exist before the ring. They always do, he said. But I don't need to be the main character in your story. You've had a whole novel waiting to be read. I'm just glad I got a front row seat. A silence stretched between them, but it wasn't awkward. It was full, rich, like good soil. She leaned into his shoulder. You were my soil, you know that. I bloomed because of you. Shaq grinned. So you're saying I'm basically your miracle grow? Don't ruin it. I'm just saying, if I'm a fertilizer, I better be premium. They laughed, and it echoed into the breeze, floating past the fence line, into a world that used to mistake them for background noise. Later they walked the perimeter of the yard, inspecting the garden beds she wanted to expand. She pointed at a bare patch near the shed. I'm thinking wildflowers, something that grows untamed. Shaq nodded. Fits the theme. What theme? You. She pretended not to blush. But he saw it anyway. They wandered back to the porch and sat under the string lights that clicked on as dusk rolled in. Fireflies blinked lazily through the air. Inside, a stack of mail waited. Donation receipts, thank you letters, a request for Delilah to keynote an education conference in D.C. She hadn't answered yet. Might not. Not everything needed a spotlight. The Whitmore name had now found its way into new places. After-school programs, mentorship tracks, scholarship endowments. And yet Delilah never once put it on a business card. She kept her firm small, select clients, purpose-driven projects, no corporate empires, no flashing logos. Her name, after all, had already become its own kind of brand. But even with the noise building around them, offers, opportunities, endorsements, this right here was what mattered most to them both. The porch, the peace, the simplicity. I think they finally get it, she said softly. The St. Clairs, the Whitmore board, the press. I think they finally understand I didn't walk away because I wasn't strong enough. I walked away because I was strong enough to build something else. Shaq leaned his head back, watching the sky fade from lavender to navy.
You know what I think? He said.
What? I think they never really saw you coming. And now that they have, they don't know what to do. She smirked. Let him keep guessing. He turned toward her, resting an arm along the back of the bench. You remember that night after the gala, when I asked you if you regretted not taking the spotlight? She nodded. I think you chose the better spotlight, he said. One that shines on everybody else. She looked over the yard again, at the patches of dirt that would become wildflowers, at the foundation's monthly newsletter, sitting on the coffee table, at the student letters pinned on the fridge inside, at a life built from intention, not inheritance. And she whispered, This is what wealth should feel like. Shaq nodded. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you put into motion. They sat there until the stars came out. Until the moonlight caught her curls and made them glow like something celestial. Until even the past felt too small to hold them anymore. At some point, Delilah whispered, I spent my whole life thinking I had to earn my way into rooms. You were the room, Shaq replied. They just didn't know how to stand in it. She took his hand, and he gave it a gentle squeeze. You still think people are whispering about us? She asked. Shaq grinned, wide and warm. Let him whisper. We got work to do. The night hummed with cicadas, and somewhere down the road, a wind chime clinked softly against a porch beam. The world was still spinning, loud and chaotic, but their corner of it was calm, sure, unshaken, and in that stillness, in that quiet triumph of love over legacy, truth over image, dignity over revenge, Delilah and Shaq didn't find a fairy tale. They found something better, a beginning. If that story stirred something in you, don't let it end with the credits. Stick around for more truths wrapped in drama, legacy, and quiet rebellion. We're not here to tell fairy tales. We're here to rewrite the ones they got wrong. Because the best stories, they don't just entertain. They make you feel seen.